Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, Maduro had declared to the United Nations in 2015. 303 billion barrels. Enough to make his country rich for generations. But sitting in that CIA interrogation room in 2024, Nicolás Maduro whispered 6 words that would rewrite everything. The oil, it was never there. The interrogation had been going for 6 hours. Maduro's lawyer, a court-appointed American attorney named Richard Chen, sat nervously beside him, occasionally interjecting about constitutional rights that no longer seemed to matter. Across the table, CIA Deputy Director Sarah Mitchell spread out a series of geological surveys. Unlike Trump's confrontational style, Mitchell was methodical, clinical. She didn't yell, she didn't need to. Let's talk about PDVSA, she said calmly. Petróleos de Venezuela, S.A. The state oil company, Venezuela's beating heart. What about it? Maduro's voice was hoarse from hours of talking. Mitchell slid a document across the table. This is your 2014 report to OPEC. You claimed Venezuela had 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. Largest in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia. Yes. Where did that number come from? Maduro shifted uncomfortably. Geological surveys, technical assessments, our engineers, your engineers, Mitchell interrupted softly, were lying. And you knew it. That's when everything changed. The room fell silent. Even the lawyer looked up sharply. I don't know what you mean, Maduro said, but his eyes betrayed him. Mitchell opened a laptop and turned it toward him. A video began playing. It showed a meeting room in Miraflores Palace. The date stamp read March 2013. On screen, a younger Maduro sat at the head of a table surrounded by PDVSA executives. One of them, Rafael Ramirez, then president of PDVSA, was speaking. Mr. President, we need to discuss the reserve numbers. The actual recoverable oil is significantly lower than what we've been reporting. On screen, Maduro leaned forward. How much lower? Perhaps 40% lower, maybe more. The heavy crude in the Orinoco Belt. It's far more expensive to extract than we anticipated. At current oil prices, much of it isn't economically viable. The video showed Maduro sitting back, thinking. Then, what does the world believe our reserves are? Around 300 billion barrels. Then that's what they remain. We can't afford the truth. Not now, not with the economy struggling. We need foreign investment. We need the leverage that those numbers give us. The video ended, but you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Mitchell closed the laptop. We recovered that recording from Rafael Ramirez's personal archive. He kept insurance. Smart man. Maduro said nothing. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but Maduro waved him off. You want to know the truth? Maduro's voice was barely above a whisper. Fine, I'll tell you the truth. Mitchell nodded to a technician, who activated a recording device. A small red light blinked on. The Orinoco Belt oil, Maduro began slowly, it's real. It exists. But it's not what we said it was. Explain. Maduro took a deep breath. The oil in the Orinoco Belt is extra heavy crude. It has the consistency of peanut butter. To extract it, you need specialized equipment, extreme heat, chemical processing. Every barrel costs between $40 and $60 to produce. He looked down at his handcuffed wrists. When oil prices were at $100 per barrel under Chavez, we could afford it. We were making money, but when prices crashed in 2014, 2015, we were losing money on every barrel we extracted. So you stopped extracting? Mitchell asked. We couldn't stop completely. We needed the revenue, but we reduced production drastically. And we kept reporting the same reserve numbers because... He paused. Because those numbers were our only leverage with Russia, China, everyone. Those numbers were the only reason anyone still took us seriously. Wait a minute, don't miss this detail. Mitchell pulled out another document. This is a classified Russian intelligence assessment from 2016. They estimated Venezuela's economically recoverable reserves at around 80 billion barrels. Less than a third of what you claimed. The Russians knew? Maduro looked genuinely surprised. The Russians knew. The Chinese knew. The Americans knew. Everyone knew, Mr. Maduro. Mitchell's voice was cold. The only people who didn't know were your own citizens and the international investors you were defrauding. Maduro's lawyer finally spoke up. My client was operating on information provided by. Your client, Mitchell cut him off, was committing securities fraud on a national scale. He inflated reserve numbers to secure billions in loans from China and Russia. Loans that Venezuela can never repay because the collateral, the oil, doesn't exist in the quantities claimed. She turned back to Maduro. Let's talk numbers. Real numbers. How much recoverable oil does Venezuela actually have? Maduro was silent for a long moment. The weight of the confession hung in the air. At current extraction costs and technology? He looked up, his eyes hollow. Maybe 100 billion barrels. Maybe less. And only about 30 billion of that is conventional crude that's actually profitable to extract. Now what you're seeing is nothing. Mitchell wrote down the numbers. So you lied about 200 billion barrels of reserves. I maintained the numbers that Chavez established. Chavez is dead. You were president for 11 years. You could have corrected the record at any time. And admit weakness? Maduro's laugh was bitter. Do you know what would have happened if I'd admitted the truth? The opposition would have used it against me. Foreign investors would have fled. Russia and China would have demanded immediate repayment of loans. The country would have collapsed even faster than it did. So instead, you committed fraud. You took Chinese loans using fake collateral. You signed contracts with Russian oil companies based on reserves that didn't exist. You sold bonds to international investors backed by phantom barrels. Maduro had no response. Mitchell pulled out a financial document. In 2016, you secured a $5 billion loan from China. The collateral was oil reserves. Based on your claimed 303 billion barrels, it seemed reasonable. But if your actual reserves are only 100 billion barrels, and your existing debts already exceed what you can repay. It was fraud, Maduro said quietly. I know. Say it clearly. For the record, Maduro looked at the red recording light, then at his lawyer, who seemed to be having a small panic attack. Then back at Mitchell. For the official record of the United States government, he said slowly, I, Nicolás Maduro Moros, former president of Venezuela, confirm that the oil reserve figures reported to OPEC, the United Nations, and international financial institutions between 2013 and 2024 were knowingly inflated. The actual economically recoverable reserves were approximately one-third of reported numbers. This information was used to secure loans and investments that Venezuela cannot repay. You won't believe this, but Mitchell smiled thinly. Thank you for that clarity. Now let's discuss what happened to the money from those loans. Maduro's face went pale. What do you mean? I mean, Mitchell said, opening another folder, China and Russia loaned Venezuela over $60 billion between 2013 and 2019. Most of it was supposed to go toward oil infrastructure, refineries, and social programs. But our forensic accountants have been tracking the money. And something interesting happened. She slid a bank statement across the table. It showed an account in Singapore. The balance was staggering, $847 million. That's your personal account, Mr. Maduro. Opened in 2015 under a shell company. And it's just one of 7 we've found so far. Maduro stared at the bank statement like it was a venomous snake. His lawyer grabbed his arm and whispered urgently, don't say anything else. Don't. The loan money, Mitchell continued relentlessly, was supposed to rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure. New drilling equipment, refinery repairs, tanker purchases. Instead, at least $12 billion, that we know of, was diverted into offshore accounts. She spread out more documents. Each one showed a different shell company, a different account, a different fortune. Dubai, Singapore, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Panama, Macau, Hong Kong. Mitchell tapped each document. You created an entire network to steal from your own country. While Venezuelans were starving, while hospitals had no medicine, while children were dying from malnutrition, you were stashing billions in foreign banks. I was ensuring the survival of the revolution, Maduro said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. The revolution? Mitchell's laugh was sharp. Mr. Maduro, you stole more money than most dictators dream of. You make Mobutu look like an amateur. You make Marcos look restrained. But the really shocking thing is, Mitchell pulled out a photograph. It showed Maduro at a private airport, standing next to a Gulfstream G650 private jet. This aircraft, she said, is registered to a Panamanian shell company called Bolívar Internacional Holdings. That company is owned by another shell company in the Cayman Islands. And that company's beneficiary is, can you guess? Maduro said nothing. Your eldest son, Nicolásito. He owns a $65 million private jet while Venezuelan children drink contaminated water. She showed another photo. A mansion in Madrid, your daughter's property, $18 million. Purchased in 2017, the same year Venezuela had the world's highest inflation rate. Another photo. A yacht docked in Tortola. Your nephew's toy, $43 million. The photos kept coming, each one a monument to corruption. Each one bought with money stolen from oil loans secured with fake reserve numbers. Don't miss this detail. The worst part, Mitchell said quietly, is that if you'd told the truth about the oil reserves back in 2013, Venezuela might have survived. You could have pivoted the economy, diversified, prepared for the decline, but you chose the lie. You chose the fraud, and you chose to profit from it while your country burned. Maduro's hands trembled. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Chavez had just died, the opposition was growing, the economy was already struggling. If I'd admitted weakness, they would have torn me apart. So you chose to tear apart your country instead. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Maduro's lawyer tried again. Mr. Maduro, I strongly advise. It's over, Maduro said, cutting him off. Don't you see? It's all over. He looked at Mitchell. What do you want from me? Everything, she said simply. Every account number, every shell company, every person who helped you, every official you bribed, every banker who laundered the money, every Chinese official who knew about the fraud, every Russian oligarch who took a cut. And if I give you all of that, then you get to keep breathing. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in financial confession. Maduro spoke, Mitchell typed, and the lawyer sat in stunned silence as a decade of corruption unraveled. The Chinese knew from the beginning, Maduro said. They did their own geological surveys in 2014. They knew the oil reserves were inflated. But they didn't care. Why not? Mitchell asked. Because they weren't really loaning us money for oil. They were buying influence in Latin America. The oil was just the excuse. The real value was geopolitical, a foothold in America's backyard. He explained how the loans worked. China would loan Venezuela billions, ostensibly for oil infrastructure. But the contract stipulated that Chinese companies had to do the construction. Chinese workers had to be hired. Chinese equipment had to be used. So the money never really left China, Mitchell observed. Exactly, it just cycled through Venezuela and back to Chinese state companies. We got maybe 30% of the actual value. The rest disappeared into the system. And your cut? Maduro hesitated, then, 5% of every loan, paid into offshore accounts, officially as consulting fees for expediting the deals. Mitchell did quick math in her head. 60 billion in loans, 5%, that's $3 billion. Not all of it was mine, Maduro said quickly. It was divided among key officials. Diosdado got a share, Cabello, Padrino, the Supreme Court justices, everyone who needed to sign off on the deals. How much did you personally keep? Around 800 million, maybe more. I lost track. That's when everything changed. The door opened, a new figure entered, an older man in a three-piece suit with silver hair and sharp eyes. Mitchell stood up immediately. Mr. Secretary, she said with deference. Secretary of State James Richardson nodded and took a seat. Maduro recognized him from news broadcasts. His presence elevated the interrogation to a different level entirely. Mr. Maduro, Richardson said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in government, I've been listening to your confession from the observation room. It's quite remarkable, but I have some questions that go beyond just your personal corruption. He pulled out a folder marked Top Secret. The oil reserve fraud wasn't just about loans from China and Russia. It affected global oil markets, OPEC policy, American energy strategy. When Venezuela claimed to have 303 billion barrels, it influenced global pricing, production decisions, strategic planning. Richardson leaned forward. In 2014, when oil prices collapsed, Saudi Arabia made decisions based partly on your false numbers. They flooded the market, thinking Venezuela could compete. But you couldn't. Your production crashed, and that crash had ripple effects across the global economy. I never intended, Maduro began. Intent doesn't matter, Richardson cut him off. Consequences matter. Your lie destabilized global energy markets for a decade. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Richardson opened the classified folder. Inside were satellite photographs of Venezuelan oil facilities. But these weren't ordinary photos. These images are from last month, Richardson said. Notice anything unusual? Maduro studied the photos. They showed the Jose oil complex, Venezuela's largest refinery. But something was wrong. The facility looked abandoned, overgrown with vegetation, equipment rusting. The complex is dead, Richardson said flatly. So is the Paraguana refinery. And the Cardon refinery. 3 of your largest facilities. Completely non-operational. When did that happen? Maduro's voice was quiet. They've been deteriorating since 2017. Without maintenance, without investment, without spare parts. They just slowly stopped working. And you kept reporting oil production numbers as if they were still operational. Yes. So not only were the reserves fake, but the production numbers were fake too? Maduro nodded miserably. By 2022, we were producing maybe 500,000 barrels per day. We reported 1.5 million. The difference was creative accounting. Richardson sat back, processing this. So when the Biden administration negotiated with you in 2023 about oil exports to offset the Russian embargo, we couldn't deliver the promised quantities. We didn't have the capacity. That's why the deal fell apart. Now what you're seeing is nothing. Richardson's expression darkened. Do you understand what you've done? The US government made strategic decisions based on your false production capacity. We turned down alternative suppliers because we thought Venezuelan oil could fill the gap. And it couldn't, because you were lying. Yes, people lost their jobs because of high energy prices. American families struggled to heat their homes. Our economy took hits, all because you were protecting a lie. Maduro had no response. What could he say? Richardson stood up. Ms. Mitchell, I've heard enough. Compile everything. I need to brief the president immediately. He looked down at Maduro one last time. You didn't just destroy Venezuela, Mr. Maduro. You helped destabilize the entire Western Hemisphere's economy. That's not just corruption. That's economic warfare. He left. The door closed with a heavy finality. Mitchell turned back to Maduro. Ready to continue? We still haven't discussed the Russian contracts. Maduro looked at her with exhausted eyes. How much more do you need? All of it, every last detail. Because the secretary is right, this isn't just about your corruption anymore. This is about a decade of economic sabotage that affected billions of people. After a brief recess, the interrogation resumed. Mitchell had been replaced by a new interrogator, a man introduced only as Thompson, from the Treasury Department. His specialty was financial crimes and sanctions evasion. Let's talk about Rosneft, Thompson said, opening yet another folder. Rosneft, Russia's state oil company, one of Venezuela's biggest partners and creditors. What about them? Maduro asked wearily. In 2014, you signed a deal giving Rosneft a 49.9% stake in Venezuela's oil production. They loaned you $6 billion against future oil deliveries. But here's what's interesting. Thompson pulled out a contract. This contract values your oil reserves at $10 per barrel for calculation purposes. But the global market price was $100 per barrel at the time. Why did you agree to such terrible terms? Maduro shifted uncomfortably. We needed the money. No one else would lend to us. Or, Thompson said, you knew the reserves were fake and you couldn't risk Russian auditors discovering the truth. So you gave them a sweetheart deal to keep them from looking too closely. The accusation hung in the air. Did Russian intelligence know about the fake reserves? Thompson pressed. I think so. They must have suspected. Must have? Or did they know for certain? But the really shocking thing is, Maduro took a deep breath. In 2016, a Russian intelligence officer came to Caracas. He met with me privately. He said he wanted to discuss certain discrepancies in our geological data. What discrepancies? He didn't specify, but the implication was clear. They knew the reserves were inflated. He said Russia didn't care about the numbers as long as we remained reliable partners in other ways. What other ways? Military cooperation, intelligence sharing, voting with Russia in the UN, allowing Russian military bases on Venezuelan soil. Thompson's eyes narrowed. Russian military bases? There are no Russian bases in Venezuela. Not officially, Maduro said. But there are training facilities, Russian advisors, electronic surveillance stations supposedly for civilian purposes. They're all military installations operating under civilian cover. He was giving up everything now. Every secret, every deal, every compromise. The oil was always secondary, Maduro continued. Russia wanted a military presence in Latin America. The oil loans were just the excuse. And I gave them what they wanted because I needed their political protection. Thompson wrote furiously. How many Russian military personnel are currently in Venezuela? As of when I was captured? Maybe 500, could be more. They were very secretive about it. And what were they doing? Electronic warfare training, signals intelligence, some missile defense systems installation. They were preparing Venezuela to be a potential forward operating base if tensions with the US ever escalated to conflict. Wait a minute, don't miss this detail. Thompson leaned forward. You turned your country into a Russian military proxy. You know that's an act of aggression against the United States, right? I was trying to survive. The US wanted me gone. Russia was the only power willing to protect me. So you sold out your country's sovereignty to stay in power. Maduro had no answer to that. Thompson pulled out another document. Let's talk about the tanker scheme. In 2020, when US sanctions made it impossible to sell oil legally, you started using Russian and Iranian tankers to smuggle oil to Asia. Ship-to-ship transfers in international waters. False documentation. Ghost companies. Yes, and these operations were coordinated through a company called, he checked his notes, Rosneft Trading, which was later sanctioned by the US. Yes, how much oil did you export through this scheme? I don't know the exact numbers. Maybe 200,000 barrels per day at its peak. And the revenue went where? Maduro hesitated. Thompson noticed. Mr. Maduro, we've been over this. Complete honesty or no deal. The revenue was split, 30% to Venezuela, which meant mostly into government accounts I controlled. 30% to Russia as payment for facilitation. 40% to various middlemen, shell companies, and fixers who made the deals work. So even your illegal oil sales were being stolen from. Yes, Thompson sat back, absorbing the scale of the corruption. Do you understand that you essentially destroyed one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America? Venezuela should have been rich. Instead, it's a failed state. Because of you.